Sakfern, and Zerbal, and Moral I Toai et to o ma fur. Transcript Goga, Perd, Brichia to, Bigia soi vi to I suck a toai fern. Bibuhum, said cat you cho you smart fern. Tenho wa here. Let me tell you something about the kind of quiet that settles over a room when a deal is about to die. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just this heavy stillness, like the air before a thunderstorm, and every experienced person in that room can feel it, even if they can't name it. I felt it the moment Tyler Ashworth walked into that conference room in Tokyo and handed Kenji Mori a business card with 2 hands, but bowed at exactly the wrong angle. Small thing. Deadly thing. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 54 years old, and for the past 21 years I've been building and protecting financial partnerships between American investment banks and Japanese institutional investors. Not the flashy kind of work that gets you on magazine covers. The kind that gets done in private dining rooms where 3 generations of the same family sit across from you. And they're not just evaluating your numbers, they're evaluating whether you understand who they are. Until 8 months ago, I was managing director of cross-border institutional relations at Hargrove Capital Partners. We had $2.3 billion in active Japanese partnerships, and roughly $900 million of that ran directly through my relationships. Relationships I'd spent 2 decades earning 1 cup of tea at a time. Then Tyler Ashworth arrived, and everything I'd built became, in his words, an inefficient single point of failure. He wasn't wrong about the single point part. He was catastrophically wrong about what that meant. Tyler was 31, the son of our firm's founding partner Robert Ashworth. Wharton MBA with honors, sharp as a blade, and absolutely convinced that the financial world his father had built was just one good algorithm away from running itself. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes from being told you're brilliant so many times, you stop questioning whether the people telling you that actually know what brilliant looks like. I remember his first week. He called a team-wide meeting and spent 90 minutes walking us through a slide deck about relationship infrastructure modernization. I'm sitting there thinking about Mori-san, who'd taken me to his family's ancestral shrine in Kyoto the previous spring and shown me a woodblock print that had been in his family for 400 years. No slide deck captures that, no algorithm prices it. But I kept my mouth shut. You don't survive 21 years in this business by telling the boss's son his big ideas are dangerous on day 3. Our first real conflict happened about 4 months after he arrived. Tyler had decided our quarterly in-person review visits to Tokyo were redundant travel spend that could be replaced with video calls and automated reporting dashboards. I explained, carefully, respectfully, that for our Japanese partners, the physical presence wasn't a formality. It was the signal. Showing up said, "You matter enough for me to cross an ocean." Not showing up said something too. He listened to me the way someone listens to an old mechanic explaining why you can't just pour soda into a gas tank. Politely. Unconvinced. I made the trips anyway, budgeted them under critical account maintenance, and didn't make a show of it. Some battles you win by just quietly doing the right thing and letting the results speak. But Tyler kept moving, and he kept moving in my direction. The deal that brought everything to a head was the Mitsuhara Group acquisition. Mitsuhara was a 90-year-old Japanese conglomerate looking to restructure its North American real estate and infrastructure holdings, roughly $800 million in assets that needed American financial management, with the kind of institutional credibility Hargrove had spent 30 years building. When their board began evaluating partners, they came to us specifically, not to Hargrove in the abstract. To me. I know that sounds like ego, but it isn't. Kenji Mori told me directly during a private dinner in Shinjuku. The kind of dinner where the restaurant has no sign on the door and the chef has known your preferred sake temperature for 10 years. Webb-san, he said, setting down his cup. Mitsuhara does not invest in institutions. We invest in people we trust. We trust you. That dinner happened in February. By April, Tyler had been assigned to co-lead the deal. I understood why, at least on paper. This was going to be the largest single transaction in Hargrove's history. Tyler's father wanted his son's fingerprints on it. I get that. I have kids of my own. What I didn't get was what happened next. Tyler spent 3 weeks analyzing the Mitsuhara relationship, not by meeting anyone, but by running the data through a client intelligence platform he'd licensed without telling anyone. Transaction history, communication cadence, response time metrics. He built a whole model of how the relationship worked. then decided it was being managed emotionally rather than strategically. That's when he brought in his college friend, a kid named Brendan Walsh, to handle client communications optimization. Brendan was 27, had done 2 years at a consulting firm, and had never set foot in Japan. He spoke zero Japanese. His preparation for the Mitsuhara engagement, as far as I could tell, consisted of reading a Wikipedia article about tea ceremony etiquette and watching a YouTube video about bowing. I found out about Brendan's role the same way I found out about most of Tyler's decisions. Too late to stop it, just in time to see the damage it would cause. The FSA compliance issue was what finally forced things into the open. Hargrove had held a specific regulatory standing with Japan's Financial Services Authority for 11 years, a status that required a designated relationship officer with documented history and verified credentials. That officer was me by name, embedded in our FSA registration. Tyler's restructuring plan had quietly reassigned that designation without notifying the FSA or running it through our compliance team. I caught it during a routine file review on a Tuesday afternoon, sat on it for 24 hours, made sure I understood exactly what the exposure was, then took it to our chief compliance officer, Linda Chen. She went pale when I showed her the paperwork. "Tyler signed off on this?" she asked. "His assistant did on his behalf." She was quiet for a long moment. "Does he understand what FSA designation status means in practice?" "I don't think he knows it exists." I helped her draft the correction filing. We fixed the immediate exposure quietly without making it a crisis. I told Linda that Tyler would need to be briefed on why this couldn't happen again. She agreed. The briefing happened. Tyler nodded through it with the expression of someone being told to use a coaster. Minor inconvenience, easily ignored. 3 weeks later, I walked past the glass-walled conference room and heard Tyler on the phone. The door was cracked. "Look, Marcus is great, but he's running this like it's 1995. The Japanese partners don't need hand-holding anymore. They need efficiency. We're leaving real money on the table because one guy thinks he needs to fly to Tokyo 4 times a year to drink tea and talk about feelings. I'm fixing that." I stood in the hallway for a moment, holding a folder of Mitsuhara due diligence files. 4 times a year to drink tea and talk about feelings. 21 years distilled into a bad joke. I went back to my office and started keeping very careful records. The signing was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday in October. Mitsuhara's delegation was flying in. Kenji Mori himself, his eldest son Takashi, who was being groomed to succeed him, 2 senior board members, and their lead counsel. This was not a routine meeting. In Japanese business culture, when the patriarch of a founding family crosses the Pacific to sign an agreement, he is making a statement about the depth of his commitment. You honor that with equal deliberate care. Tyler's preparation for the meeting was a 40-slide presentation deck built around Hargrove's technology platform and projected efficiency gains. Clean, polished, built entirely around numbers. No acknowledgement of the relationship history. No recognition of what Mori-san's personal presence signified. No mention of the 21 years that had preceded this moment. I prepared something different. I commissioned a custom binding of our deal documentation. Not because it was required, but because presentation of documents is itself a communication in Japanese professional culture. I'd written an introductory address that acknowledged the Mitsuhara family's legacy and the meaning of their trust. I'd coordinated the small ceremonial details, the order of presentation, the exchange of gifts, the seating arrangement that acknowledged Mori-san's seniority. Tyler reviewed my materials 2 days before the signing and handed them back to me. "This is too formal. We want to come across as modern partners, not a history museum. Brendan's going to handle the opening." He paused. "Actually, Marcus, can you brief Brendan on the cultural stuff? Give him the highlights?" I gave Brendan 2 hours. He took notes on his phone. He asked me how to say, "pleased to meet you" in Japanese, and whether he'd need to take his shoes off anywhere. I went home that night and sat on my back porch for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. I want to be honest with you about something. I wasn't sitting there plotting. I wasn't running calculations about what was going to happen. I was just tired. 21 years of careful work, of showing up, of learning the language and the culture and the meaning behind the rituals. And it had come down to being asked to brief a 27-year-old on the highlights the day before one of the most consequential deals in the company's history. But here's what I also knew. Sitting on that porch, I had read every line of the Mitsuhara agreement. and buried in the compliance appendix, because Japanese institutional investment agreements always have substantial compliance appendices. There was a clause I recognized. I'd seen language like it before in deals with similar regulatory requirements. The designated relationship officer listed in the FSA registration had to be present at the execution signing and had to provide documentary verification of their credentials at the time of signing. It was a regulatory requirement, not a formality. And the officer named in our registration was still technically me, because the correction filing Linda and I had submitted hadn't yet been fully processed. I didn't tell Tyler. I didn't tell anyone. Was that wrong? I've thought about it. Here's what I've concluded. I didn't create that clause. I didn't design the FSA requirement. I didn't choose to be the named officer in a registration that hadn't been properly updated. I just knew about it, and I made a decision that if Tyler wanted to manage this his way, he was going to manage this his way, from start to finish, with whatever consequences attached to that. The morning of the signing, I arrived at the office early. My desk was already mostly cleared. HR had asked me the previous afternoon to have my personal items ready to go, which was the first indication of what was coming. I took my time with my coffee. I reviewed the Mitsuhara file one more time, not because I needed to, but because 21 years deserved a proper goodbye. Tyler came by at 8:30. He was wearing a new suit. He looked confident and clean and very young. "Marcus, we need to talk before the Mitsuhara team arrives." I knew what was coming. I'd known for weeks, honestly. I followed him into his office. He gave it to me straight, which I respected. No corporate euphemisms about transitions and restructuring. He told me the company was going in a new direction. My role wasn't part of that direction. HR had my separation package ready, and they'd like to have everything finalized before the signing to keep the day clean. Keep the day clean. I looked at him for a moment. He was watching me with that careful expression people wear when they're braced for a reaction. I said, "I appreciate you telling me directly. And I meant it. I hope you know this isn't personal. Your work here has been excellent." "I know what it is," I told him. And I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out. I handled the HR paperwork downstairs. Janet from HR, we'd worked together for 12 years, was professionally kind about it in a way that was somehow sadder than if she'd been cold. I signed what needed to be signed, turned in my badge, and was asked to wait in the lobby while someone brought down a box of my personal items. I was sitting in the lobby when the Mitsuhara delegation came through the front doors. Kenji Mori was 71 years old, with the unhurried bearing of a man who had never once been in a situation he didn't understand completely. His son walked beside him. Behind them, their board members and council. Mori-san saw me immediately. He paused. His eyes went to the box on the seat beside me, then back to my face. In Japanese, he said quietly, "Webb-san, you are leaving today." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, in Japanese. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I have thought about many times since. A house that does not honor those who built it will find its foundation unstable. He bowed. I bowed. He walked toward the elevator with his delegation, and I sat back down. 20 minutes later, I walked out of that building with a box under my arm and no particular hurry anywhere to be. Here's what happened in the next 48 hours. And I know this not because I was there, but because 5 different people who were there called me, and because one of them was Linda Chen, who I trust completely. Brendan Walsh opened the signing meeting by mispronouncing Mitsuhara as Mitsubara twice, and then, attempting to demonstrate cultural awareness, presented Kenji Mori with a gift that Tyler had sourced through a corporate gifting service. It was a set of branded Hargrove items, a pen, a portfolio, a USB drive. In Japanese business culture, a corporate branded gift presented to a founding patriarch at a ceremony of this significance reads as a dismissal. It says, "You are a transaction. We bought you a company pen." Mori-san accepted it with perfect courtesy. He set it aside without examining it. Then Brendan moved to the signing documents, and that's when the FSA issue surfaced. Mitsuhara's lead counsel, a meticulous man named Yamaguchi who had been doing cross-border institutional deals for 30 years, went through the compliance appendix line by line, as his job required him to do. He found the designated officer requirement. He found my name in the FSA registration. He looked up and asked, in careful English, whether I would be joining them to complete the execution documentation. Tyler told him I was no longer with the firm. Yamaguchi asked when the FSA designation update had been finalized. Tyler looked at Brendan. Brendan looked at his phone. The answer, it turned out, was that it hadn't been. Linda's correction filing was still processing. The FSA designation was still in my name. The signing couldn't proceed without either my presence or a formal FSA designation amendment, a process that takes a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. Mori-san, who had followed the exchange without expression, folded his hands on the table. He asked Tyler politely and precisely why the relationship officer of record had been removed on the day of a major execution without first resolving the regulatory standing. Tyler had no answer that worked. Mori-san stood. He said, and this was translated for the room, I was told, very carefully and completely. Mitsuhara does not proceed with partners who do not understand the architecture of what they have built. We will need time to reconsider. They left. The whole delegation. Quietly, correctly, without a scene. By close of business, Mitsuhara's counsel had sent formal written notice that they were suspending the acquisition process pending review of Hargrove's regulatory standing and internal governance practices. In financial press terms, the deal was dead. Hargrove's stock dropped 11% the next morning when the news leaked. Their two other active Japanese institutional partnerships, representing about $400 million in assets, sent formal inquiries about the status of their own agreements within 72 hours. Word travels fast in those circles, and it travels through exactly the kind of personal relationships Tyler had decided were an inefficient use of travel budget. I heard about most of this from my couch, in sweatpants, eating leftover Thai food. I was not unhappy. I was not happy either, exactly. I was just watching something settle into place that had always been going to settle into place. Linda called me on the Friday evening. I want you to know I had nothing to do with how this was handled, she said. And I want you to know that the board knows that. I appreciate that, I told her. Are you doing all right? I thought about it. Yeah, I said. I actually am. I wasn't entirely surprised when the call came the following week. It came through my former colleague James Park, who had left Hargrove 3 years earlier to join a boutique advisory firm that specialized in U.S.-Japan cross-border transactions. He'd heard what happened. He said he'd heard within 48 hours of the Mitsuhara walkout, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to meet. I met him for lunch at a sushi place in Georgetown where the chef recognized me and brought out something he hadn't put on the menu. That's 21 years of relationship work. How soon can you start? James asked me before the first course arrived. The firm he worked for, Nakamura Cross-Border Partners, had been looking to expand their U.S. institutional team for 2 years. They had strong Japanese side relationships but had struggled to find someone with both the American financial credentials and the cultural depth to bridge them properly. They had 3 potential deals in pipeline that had been on hold specifically because of that gap. The offer was substantial, more than substantial. But the number I remember most wasn't the salary. It was what the managing partner, David Nakamura, said when we met at his office 2 days later. He said, "We built this firm on the belief that the most valuable thing in cross-border institutional work isn't the model, it's the trust. We've been looking for someone who actually understands that." I signed the offer letter that afternoon. 6 months have passed since then. The 3 deals that were in pipeline have all moved forward. We closed the first one in December, a $340 million infrastructure partnership that I flew to Tokyo to finalize in person. At a dinner where the chef knew my preferred steak temperature and where Kenji Mori was among the guests. He'd introduced me to David Nakamura, as it turned out. Small world, when you've spent 21 years in it correctly. We shook hands at the end of that dinner, Mori-san and I. He said in Japanese, "The right people find their right place. It simply takes time." As for Hargrove, Tyler resigned 4 months after the Mitsuhara collapse, which was described publicly as a mutual decision and privately understood as anything but. His father, Robert Ashworth, stepped back from his board role the same quarter under what the press release called a planned succession. The 2 remaining Japanese institutional partners formally exited their agreements by year's end, which cost the firm somewhere north of $600 million in managed assets. 3 senior relationship managers, people who'd stayed through all of it, hoping it would turn around, left within 6 months. I know all 3 of them. They landed well. Brendan Walsh, the last I heard, was back in consulting. I don't think about Hargrove much. When you build your world on the right foundation, the buildings you left behind don't take up much mental real estate. What I do think about sometimes is a conversation I had last month. We'd brought on a new analyst, brilliant kid, 26, top of her class, genuinely curious about the cross-border work. She'd been studying our processes and came to me with a proposal for automating parts of our client communication cadence. She'd mapped out the workflow carefully, identified what she saw as timing inefficiencies in our follow-up protocols. I looked at her proposal. It was technically well constructed, and it would have reduced our communication touchpoints with Japanese partners by about 40%. I didn't dismiss it. I asked her to walk me through her reasoning. She explained it clearly. Then I asked her a question. Do you know why Mitsuhara Group chose us when they re-engaged with the US market? She didn't. I told her about the first time I'd visited Kenji Mori's office in Tokyo, 20 years ago, how I'd arrived 15 minutes early and waited in the reception area, and how his assistant had noticed I was reading a Japanese language industry journal I'd brought, not because I was performing diligence, but because I genuinely found it interesting. How Mori-san had come out himself to greet me, which was not standard, and had mentioned that the journal in my hands was one his father had subscribed to. How we'd talked about his father for 20 minutes before we ever discussed a single number. That's not in any process document, I told her. There's no workflow for it. It happened because I was curious about who he was, not just what he could offer. And 20 years later, when he needed to choose a partner, he called someone he'd been curious about him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So the inefficiency is actually the point." Not exactly, I told her. The relationship is the point. Sometimes that looks like inefficiency to people who are only measuring time. She asked if she could revise her proposal. I told her I'd be glad to read the new version. She came back a week later with something different, a system that handled the genuinely administrative communication automatically and freed up more time for the substantive conversations. Smart, thoughtful, built on understanding rather than assumption. I told her it was excellent, because it was. That's the thing about the work, and I've come to understand this more clearly in the past 8 months than I did in the 21 years before. The goal was never to protect the old way from the new way. The goal was always to protect what the work was actually for. The trust, the acknowledgement that the person across the table is a full human being with a history and a family and a set of values that deserve your attention. No amount of processing power changes what it means to be respected. No dashboard measures what it means to be seen. Tyler Ashworth wasn't wrong that some of what I did could be improved. He was wrong about which parts mattered. That's not a small distinction. In this work, that distinction is everything. I was in Tokyo last week. Flew in Tuesday morning, meetings through Thursday, dinner Thursday night with Mori-san and 2 of our newer partners. A family office out of Osaka that David Nakamura had been cultivating for years, and that had finally decided to move forward. Before dinner, Mori-san and I walked for a bit. He showed me a small temple near the restaurant, unremarkable from the outside, that had been rebuilt in the same location 4 times over 3 centuries. Each time something destroyed it, he told me. Fire, earthquake, war, the community rebuilt it in exactly the same place, with the same dimensions, because the location itself had meaning. Why not rebuild somewhere more convenient? I asked him. He looked at me with that slight smile he uses when he's telling you something important and wants to see if you're paying attention. Because, he said, convenience is not the reason it exists. I thought about that on the flight home. I'm still thinking about it. Some things can't be streamlined without losing what made them worth building in the first place. The people who understand that tend to be around for a long time. The people who don't tend to spend the rest of their careers explaining why a very expensive lesson wasn't entirely their fault. I don't wish Tyler Ashworth any harm. I genuinely don't. I hope he finds work that matches what he's actually good at, because he's good at real things. The analysis, the structure, the drive. I just hope he finds it somewhere that doesn't require him to understand what he currently can't. As for me, I've got 3 deals in active pipeline, a team that asks good questions, and a flight to Osaka in 6 weeks. My desk has a view of the Potomac, and on clear days you can see the Jefferson Memorial from the window in the small conference room where we do our best thinking. I've got exactly the work I should have. The kind that rewards you for showing up for 21 years and learning, slowly and carefully, what actually matters. And nobody in this office has ever asked me to give anyone a 2-hour briefing on the highlights.